to get updates in. Now, moving on with our scheduled programming. The United States is one step closer to ending its historic 40-day government shutdown after the Senate passed a key piece of legislation. In a procedural vote of 60 to 40, American senators moved forward on a measure to fund the government and essential programs until the 30th of January. The breakthrough came after 8 Senate Democratic centrists sided with Republicans, securing a deal that includes a vote next month on extending Affordable Care Act tax, a major priority for Democrats. While the measure bans federal agencies from firing employees until January the 30th of 2026, it also promises to rehire federal workers laid off during the shutdown and provide them with back pay. Joining us now is Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. He's a former diplomat and he joins us live from Washington, D.C. Of course, thank you very much for joining us, Ambassador Kapoor. Pleasure to have you. This has been going on for 40 days, the longest government shutdown in history. We've had this development today on the 40th day of it. How close is this thing to ending?
Thank you, Thomas. First of all, my condolences to all the people who have, innocent people who have lost their lives in that bomb blast in Delhi. I hope if it's an act of terrorism, the perpetrators will be brought to justice and there will be not much further damage beyond what has already been found. Coming to the issue of the shutdown, yes, you're right. There have been a very large number of shutdowns in the US. Also, since I've been here, since the last 11 years, I've seen quite a few. So it's a process whereby, because of lack of approval of funding by both the parties together, the budget is not allocated for carrying out all the aspects of governance, and thereby the government has to shut down. This is the 21st such shutdown in the history of the US. And total number of days that there have been shut down is over 162. Whereas this particular shutdown, which started on the 1st of October, is the longest in the history of the US. It's touched 41 days already. And yesterday, for the first time, there were some signs of hope, some glimmer, some light at the end of the tunnel, in the sense the total number of senators who got together and voted in favor of ending the shutdown was 60, as is required, the minimum number, because about 7 or 8 Democrats and independents voted for this bill to avert the further continuation of the shutdown. This was just a procedural vote. Today at 11 a.m., that is in a short while from now, which is just before 10 a.m. currently, so in about an hour and a few minutes, the Senate will meet to have a formal vote, and that is likely to continue in the same voting pattern as we saw yesterday, with 60 senators voting in favor of stopping the shutdown. Thereafter, once it clears the Senate hurdle, it'll go to the House of Representatives, and that requires 36 hours for convening the House. So thereafter, it has to go to the White House also for final signatures, etc. So the total time it may take is probably about 5 days or 4 days, depending on the speed with which they move. It could be a little bit faster, but not much faster than that. But the possibilities of the shutdown, stopping now is quite high, because it has impacted a very, very large number of people all over the US, and particularly in the Washington, D.C. area where we live. We know a lot of people, including our family members, who have been impacted very seriously and very significantly by this shutdown, as they've been furloughed because of federal workers. So that means they are at home without any work, without any pay. Hopefully, the courts have ruled that they have to get all their back pay also, and that they cannot be terminated. Though this government has been trying to see what are the ways to terminate some of the employment of some of the federal employees. But till January 30th, I think that is assured. Then there has been impact on many other areas also. When you go down to DC, Washington, DC, capital, the downtown area, which normally is very buzzing with a lot of activity, a lot of people, a lot of shops, a lot of restaurants. All that has been on quite a low key for the last 4 5 weeks. In particular, you don't see so many people, you don't see so many people eating out. The general atmosphere has not been very, very positive. There are other impacts of the shutdown on the healthcare, for example, or the food aid bill, for example, or the, basically the one direct impact which I had. I was traveling to
Yes.
one of the other towns in the US for a meeting, and the flights are impacted very significantly. My own flight was delayed quite a bit because the number of federal workers in the air traffic control is also very large, and many of them are furloughed currently. So, only for the essential services, you have the workers continuing in full force. Otherwise, many of the national parks are shut down. So, there is impact all around in all walks of life. Back to you, Thomas.
Yes, Ambassador Kapoor, thank you very much for giving us that information here on NewsX World. Do stay with us as we have further information. The United States has carried out strikes on 2 vessels in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, killing 6 people on board. Confirming the news, US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth stated that the boats were involved in narcotics smuggling, operating along a known trafficking route. Since September, the US has launched over a dozen similar attacks on vessels near Venezuela's coast, reportedly killing more than 70 individuals. However, there are growing calls for an investigation, with foreign leaders, legal experts and some US lawmakers demanding evidence of the illicit activity. The UN Human Rights Chief, Volker Turk, has now urged the United States to investigate the legality of its strikes on alleged drug-running vessels in the Caribbean and Pacific. Turk expressed concerns about strong indications that these actions may constitute extrajudicial killings, violating international human rights law. Of course, Ambassador Kapoor, we've seen this going on since pretty much the start of the Trump administration, where the United States strikes these boats and then uploads videos of it on social media. Does the Trump administration face any risk when it comes to breaking international law here? Of course, these strikes, they are not, they're in international waters. And of course, the US could apprehend these boats if they wanted to, but they decide to kill the people on board. What are the legalities around this, and can they be held to account if they are breaking international law?
Well, Thomas, that's a good question. Because the current situation is such that if they were indeed carrying out, illicit activities or drug smuggling or some such thing, and if you're able to prove that, then there would be some sort of justification to, capture those boats, investigate the people, carry out a thorough investigation. But to go out and summarily bomb them out of existence, blast those boats, kill those people, currently it's just a question of might is right. And, the effort is also to weaken the government of Venezuela, which is not positively disposed towards the US, and see whether it leads to regime change or toppling of Maduro. But currently, they are going ahead with the statements that these boats are being used for smuggling of drugs and that they are impacting the US and the US people here. So that's why they are carrying out these attacks and, bombing these boats and killing those people. But, if might was not right, and if the strict laws of the International Court of Justice or the UN have to be analyzed and imposed, then of course there would be a lot
Yes.
of questioning of these sort of actions.
Yes, Ambassador Kapoor, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you here on the programme. We now move on, and in the US, a federal judge has temporarily blocked the Trump administration's directive that US states undo steps they took to issue full supplementary nutrition assistance program food aid benefits. The move came after a federal appeals court late on Sunday allowed a judge's order to stand that directs US officials to fully fund this month's food aid benefits for 42 million low-income Americans during the ongoing U.S. government shutdown. The fight over food benefits has become a central flashpoint between all three branches of government during the historically long shutdown. Almost 42 American people rely on this food assistance to feed themselves and their families, and on average, every single household receives around $350 a month in benefits. We're now joined by Andrew Latham. He's an international relations expert, and he joins us live from Minneapolis. Andrew, the court has halted the administration's attempt to scale back food aid. What does that reveal about judicial checks on executive power here?
Well, it reveals a few things, one of which there is a balance of power between the executive branch and the legislative branch and judicial branch, but also between the federal government and the state governments. The latest I heard was that the U.S. Supreme Court, Justice Ketanji Brown, has said that there needs to be time for another appeal, and that therefore the USDA, the federal agency that administers the food aid program, SNAP, is allowed to continue with its suspension. What we see here is the states, so it's federally funded, this program, but it's administered through state governments, and they're caught in the crossfire. On the one hand, they're being told by the feds, the federal government, USDA, you can't do this, you have to stop giving this aid. On the other hand, some courts are telling them, no, you have to provide this aid. And they're being whipsawed back and forth between the federal government and the judiciary. It's a very uncomfortable time to be in certain state capitals right now.
Yes, indeed. Andrew, thank you very much. Do stay with us as we have further news coming out of the US Capitol. And Donald Trump has pardoned dozens of allies accused of trying to overturn his 2020 election loss. According to the US Justice Department, Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, Jeffrey Clark, and Sidney Powell are also pardoned by President Trump. According to a post on X by Ed Martin, who oversees the Department of Weaponization Group, President Trump says the move would end a grave national injustice and continue the process of national reconciliation. The Justice Department had been investigating a plan by Trump and his supporters to submit an alternative slate of state electors to reverse President Joe Biden's victory in the 2020 presidential election. Andrew, of course, this follows a flurry of pardons that the Trump administration has done so far. What message does this one in particular send about accountability in American democracy?
Well, it sends some conflicting messages. First of all, it's largely symbolic. Many of these people have been charged in state courts over which the President of the United States has no jurisdiction. So he can only pardon them for federal crimes. He can't pardon them for state crimes. Wow. And so they're still being held in jeopardy, that's for sure. But it also sends a signal that, again, polarization in the United States is corroding, eroding the legitimacy of certain institutions, which for a long time were sort of beyond reproach, or almost beyond reproach. The courts, often viewed by many Americans as the ultimate backstop to judicial, or to legislative overreach or executive overreach. And now President Trump is trying to short circuit that by misusing what is a legitimate tool of statecraft. A federal pardon is a legitimate guardrail to avoid federal courts getting beyond their remit. But when it's weaponized and used for narrow, personal, and partisan political purposes, then that's counterproductive.
Yeah, and Andrew, of course, the power of a presidential pardon is something that is debated on whether it should exist. How do you analyze Donald Trump's usage of it? Of course, we've seen him pardon the likes of George Santos, and we've seen the pardon many Capitol rioters when he first took office. What are your thoughts of Donald Trump's usage of that power?
Yeah, again, the founders of this country, I think, wisely put this in place as the ultimate backstop to undo any potential injustice. But it can be misused, and I think has been misused. But that all depends, of course, on whether you think what was done back in that election cycle, the January 20, whatever it was now. Was that an injustice? Donald Trump and his supporters clearly think it was an injustice, and the people who were being tried for their role in support of the president should therefore be pardoned to undo an injustice. If you think that those charges were laid justly and appropriately, then clearly what President Trump is doing is undermining the rule of law, using the rule of law to undermine the rule of law. I think, again, the way one looks at this in this country right now really depends on which party, more than that, on what one's view of Donald Trump is. If you're a supporter, then you're in favor of him pardoning the likes of Rudy Giuliani. If you're an opponent, then you're very much opposed to what he's been doing.
Yes, Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. Do stay as we discuss one final story. As a fragile trade truce between the United States and China continues to take shape, China has said that it would suspend for 1 year the special port fees on US vessels. Simultaneously with Washington's pause on levies targeting Chinese ships, the United States and China have been involved in a volatile trade and tariff war for months, but agreed to walk back some punitive measures after President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump met last month in South Korea. At one point, duties on both sides had reached prohibitive triple-digit levels, hampering trade between the world's largest economies and snarling global supply chains. The US shipbuilding industry was dominant after the Second World War, but has gradually declined and now accounts for just 0.1% of global output. Andrew Latham joins us once again. Andrew, China has suspended its port fees for 1 year. Is this a gesture of goodwill or tactical diplomacy?
I think it can be construed as both. It reminds me of the rare earth elements hiatus, the suspension of those tariffs for a year. I think the frame I would bring to bear here is détente. So détente famously was not the end of the Cold War, but it was a relaxation of tensions in the context of the Cold War back in the 1990s and 1980s and 1990s. And we see a similar logic here. There is a trade war going on between China and the United States. And this is a relaxation of tensions, both the rare earth elements piece and this shipping piece and some other elements as well, designed, to address your question directly, I think to create, first of all, just to lower the temperature, but also to create some space within which some better deal, some bigger deal, some more comprehensive deal could be negotiated. But before we can get there, there has to be this dialing down of tensions, this relaxation of tensions. And that's how I see both Washington's moves and Beijing's moves around this set of issues.
Yes, Andrew Latham, thank you very much, as always, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here on NewsX World. And that's a wrap on America 360 this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more.